You're listening to CJSW 90.9 FM, broadcasting at a Treaty 7 territory. We are your host. I am Belen, a fourth-year Communication and Media Studies Psychology student, and
I'm your other host, Sarah, a fourth-year Communication and Media Studies student at the University of Calgary here on Treaty 7 land, or what is commonly known to some as Calgary.
Welcome to this podcast series, which is a collaboration between the Department of Communication and Media Studies and Indigenous Studies within the Faculty of Arts at the University of Calgary.
In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we would like to use this platform to acknowledge the territory of people of Treaty 7, including the Blackfoot Confederacy, which comprises of the Siksika and the Piikani and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nations, the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chinaki, Bears Paw, and the Good Stoney First Nations. I would also like to acknowledge that this platform was developed at the University of Calgary and that this body is placed on land adjacent to where the Bow River and the Elbow River meet. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation, Alberta District 5 and 6. Finally, we acknowledge all nations, Indigenous and not, who live, work, and play on this land, and who honor and celebrate this territory.
In holding the comfort of our listeners as one of the utmost true values, we want to acknowledge that the following content may be sensitive. Our goal is to contribute to disseminating knowledge, but we recognize the deep pain and trauma that these topics can evoke. We aim to approach this with the utmost respect for their experiences shared and the communities affected. It's important to note that none of the production team members identify as Indigenous. This podcast is intended strictly for educational and academic purposes. The insights shared here are not meant to be generalized, nor should they be taken as medical or health advice. Today, we're going to talk about our experiences learning about Indigenous Ethical Protocols in our Communications Capstone class. Our goal is to mobilize this knowledge and create dialogue about what we have learned and observed in this class. Throughout the term, we had the privilege of participating in a teepee raising ceremony, learning firsthand from Indigenous Elders and knowledge keepers, campus partners, and working with Indigenous 415 class to gain a deeper understanding of those Indigenous ethical protocols.
It has been our honor to learn about the beautiful practices of gift-giving, oral teachings, and sharing of stories through generations in Indigenous cultures. Through gaining insight on these ways of learning, we recognize that we need to create a space for Indigenous people to share their own stories and knowledge, and avoid the tendency to fit new knowledge into a system and systems into westernized institutional systems. Later in this podcast, we are going to be interviewing Hanna, the student support advisor at the Wellness Center here at the University of Calgary, and our campus partner for the semester. Indigenous protocols are rich and complex, and we've only begun to scratch the surface of our understanding. We also recognize that reconciliation is a long and intricate process that starts with taking time to listen to stories and lived experiences of everyone. With that being said, starting dialogue and talking about these Indigenous topics and stories is the only way that we can be active participants in the reconciliation process, because we cannot learn and grow from things that you're afraid to talk about.
Through previous conversations with our campus partner, we learned about several Indigenous wellness protocols that we will delve into more detail later. While doing our own research, we came across materials provided by Bob Joseph that were so interesting we wanted to talk about them today. Bob is an Indigenous person, or more specifically, a status Indian. His chief name is Kasumala Galis, which loosely translates to who emerges itself from the water and presents itself to the world. Bob is the founder of an Indigenous corporate training program, and his work trains people on the traditional Indigenous wellness methods. The method we wanted to share about today, as it aligns with our guest speaker's work, is often referred to as the medicine wheel. This is not a systematic, but rather an interconnected process that taps into the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual components.
The Indigenous Wellness Wheel is a holistic framework rooted in Indigenous worldviews that emphasize the balance and interconnectedness of all aspects of life. It draws from the medicine wheel, is a traditional symbol used by many Indigenous cultures, which represents the nature of life and the importance of harmony among these four dimensions.
These are often depicted into four quadrants, which also align with other Indigenous teachings and the volume of the four directions: north, east, southwest, four seasons or stages of life. The wellness wheel promotes balance among these aspects to achieve a holistic well-being, acknowledging the deep connection between individuals, communities, and the environment.
We were moved, and we would love to see this approach in wellness more widely known, as it takes into consideration every aspect of health and wellness, especially when you compare this holistic centered approach to Western modern medicine. That process is very standardized. You walk into a clinic with a health card, book an appointment online, wait a long time in a reception area, and then meet with a healthcare professional for maybe a few minutes to talk about one concern. The advice given may involve prescriptions or getting sent off to another specialist, oftentimes neglecting mental and emotional concerns that could be affecting a person. That is why we wanted to come on here today to start a dialogue around this approach to wellness, because it could benefit so many people. With that being said, as a group, we also recognize the harm and trauma that has been caused by forced integration of Indigenous people into Western medical practices, both historically and in the present. We also are committed to creating space for Indigenous voices, which is why we have invited Hanna to join us today to share more about how she integrates these approaches of wellness in the University of Calgary community.
We have been so grateful to talk and learn from our campus partner throughout the semester, and can't wait for her to share about her approach and resources available to Indigenous students here on campus. We also recognize that it's important to not merely learn Indigenous wellness protocols, instead of exploiting them or fix them into institutionalized Western practice, but instead to honor the knowledge not only to create better support for all people, but also to learn how to create a better space and resources for these Indigenous wellness protocols.
We also recognize that this is not her story to tell. It is also not solely Hanna's, as she is not a knowledge keeper and would never aim to speak on behalf of any Indigenous population. She pays the utmost respect to the people in her life who taught and guided her. The knowledge that she shares is not solely her own, but is a product of her lived experience as an Indigenous person.
Before our campus partner, Hanna, joins us, we would like to take the time to formally introduce her. Hanna is the Indigenous Student Support Advisor with the University of Calgary Student Wellness Services and works out of Red and Symbols Lodge. Originally from Labrador and one of mixed Inuit heritage, Hanna brings deep expertise in Indigenous wellness with a focus on supporting students and fostering culturally responsive care. Her work emphasizes the importance of community, tradition, and holistic practices that are central to Indigenous approaches to well-being. In addition to her work at the university, Hanna is the co-founder of the Calgary Pop-Up Care Village, a one-day event that addresses systematic vulnerabilities like homelessness, addiction, mental health challenges, and poverty. Through these efforts, it is evident that Hanna is committed to enhancing wellness, addressing systematic barriers, and being an empathetic force in her practices both within and beyond the university setting. We are grateful to Hanna for joining us today and for the opportunity to learn more about her work. Hi, Hanna. Thanks for being here. Could you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a bit about your background and work?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Hanna Woodward. I'm the Indigenous Student Support Advisor with Student Wellness Services at the University of Calgary. I was born in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador. My Inuit roots come from my mother's side with family members and ancestors from various communities around Labrador. Until 1952, when my great-grandfather got a job building a road in Labrador, my family members followed a traditional Inuit semi-nomadic lifestyle, shifting from Spotted Island in the summer to Roaches Brook in the winter. And then on my father's side, I have European heritage, primarily British fishermen who settled along the north coast of Newfoundland and fished cod in southern Labrador. I'm a registered social worker with a Bachelor of Social Work from the University of Calgary. I've been a social worker for 5 years now and worked in various different roles, which have provided me with valuable experience and knowledge, which led me to here. I worked in employment services with people who have the barrier of having a criminal record. I worked in emergency shelters for unhoused individuals. I worked in permanent supportive housing, and I've also worked in homeless outreach. My path to becoming the Indigenous Student Support Advisor really led me from being a student into a practicum with the University of Calgary Recovery Community, and eventually to the role that I'm in now.
That's amazing. So the work you do as an Indigenous Student Support Advisor is incredibly valuable here at the university. I know you mentioned this a little bit about your journey, but what inspired you to pursue this role, and how has it shaped your approach to supporting students?
All of the experiences that I've had before now have given me really good insight and knowledge and skills as a social worker. The reason I came to the University of Calgary was, like I said, because of a social work practicum with the University of Calgary recovery community. And through that work, I actually became involved in some Indigenous programming here as an Indigenous student. But then I also met with the person who was in the role before me and kind of talked about the position, and they were leaving because they got more education and wanted to move on. And I felt like it was a good fit for me to expand my skills and work with Indigenous communities, which has always been part of my passion of being a social worker.
That's so cool. And then I know we talked about this briefly before we sat today, but you also do some work with the Write and Symbol Lodge, correct?
Yeah, I do a couple of days a week at the Writing Symbols Lodge in drop-in. So that's on Wednesday afternoons and Thursday mornings. I also do some outreach there. So I try to attend as many events as I can to connect with students and just start building relationships and rapport with them so that they're comfortable coming to me for support when they need it.
That's so cool. And then at the Student Wellness Services, what specifically do you do as the Indigenous Student Support Advisor?
My role is really about supporting students in a way that addresses their needs and challenges in a holistic way. So I do work within Student Wellness Services and spend 2 days a week at the Writing Symbols Lodge, which is the Indigenous Student Center here on campus. I provide a pretty big range of services that help students thrive, including mental health support, practical problem solving, case management. My work involves providing tailored supports to address the mental and physical health of students, their financial barriers, academic, social, cultural, and recreational needs of the students. This might include exploring coping mechanisms that they already have and cultural practices that they're engaged in, highlighting their strengths, and then exploring how to expand on those and come up with new strategies for coping and new practices that they could involve themselves here at the university. It really looks different for everyone, as everyone's journey is unique. I assist with goal setting and provide supportive check-ins to ensure accountability and progress. Students get the opportunity to communicate with me what they need and how I can best support them, while I ensure that my support reflects their individual goals and circumstances. A lot of the times I'm also connecting students to resources, so that could be culturally relevant wellness supports on campus, in their communities, virtually, sometimes even communicating with the services to ensure that the students' needs are met.
It's amazing to see how your work bridges multiple areas and creates a cohesive and supportive network for Indigenous students. Your contributions are truly shaping a more inclusive and supportive campus environment. Wellness is fundamental to everyone, but it's understood and practiced in unique ways across cultures. Do you think you could share some of the key principles or values in Indigenous wellness practices that you think or feel are essential for our listeners to understand?
Indigenous wellness practices are deeply rooted in holistic approaches and traditions that emphasize interconnectedness between people, the land. Everything is connected in Indigenous cultures, and when it comes to wellness encompasses the mind, body, spirit, and emotions as outlined on the medicine wheel, as most people have probably seen. To achieve overall wellness, we have to find balance between all of these areas. So, for example, if a student meets with me because they're struggling with anxiety impacting their academic functioning, we don't just talk about their mental health and coping strategies such as breathing exercises. We could explore other aspects such as their physical health, their self-care practices, cultural practices, and connections to their communities or natural supports. Another one that comes to mind is connection to land, as it's a key principle of Indigenous wellness, as the land is central to Indigenous identities and cultures. Indigenous cultures view the land as a relative to which we have a reciprocal relationship with. So in my work and in my personal experience as well, I've heard and seen how connecting with the land can have a profound impact on an individual's wellness. This could be through land-based teachings, ceremonies, or harvesting medicines from the land. For me, spending time on the land, especially my ancestral land in Labrador, helps me find resilience and balance. I think about how the land was here to help my ancestors survive, and I'm thankful for everything it has given me and my family. I appreciate the delicious berries that I harvest from the land, and these are the same berries that my ancestors counted on for vitamin C to avoid illnesses.
That's so cool. The emphasis of interconnectedness and balance in Indigenous wellness practices is truly profound. It's a perspective that offers so much to those willing to engage and learn. There's such a rich knowledge base within Indigenous communities, deeply rooted in values of connection and shared practices like you mentioned. How would you describe the role of community and tradition in Indigenous wellness, and what makes these elements so integral to fostering well-being?
Community and tradition are central to Indigenous wellness. They're basically the foundation of overall wellness for Indigenous communities. Some students have a really strong connection to their culture and family traditions. Others have been disconnected through colonialism and are now finding their way back to their culture. Practices like smudging, talking circles, ceremonies, and storytelling are often an ongoing part of a person's wellness journey. Community provides a support network. Many Indigenous students that I work with have moved away from their communities and their support systems to seek education. Having a network of people with shared experiences and values here at the university can bring a sense of guidance and validation to students, but of course, finding and fitting into a new community can be a huge challenge for some people, on top of the challenge of transitioning to university life. This step can be super overwhelming, and students can often find themselves feeling overwhelmed by homesickness and isolation, and they really are looking for that community. So as the Indigenous Student Support Advisor, I try to help students bridge this gap. I often guide students to spaces like the Writing Symbols Lodge and encourage them to attend various cultural events on campus, such as the Cree Grandmother's Tea Ceremony in Kipitoyas. We might start with baby steps to build confidence, such as studying alone at the Red Lodge and Writing Symbols Lodge to become more comfortable with the space, then maybe attending a small event, and then maybe they'll be ready to attend a ceremony. It could look different for everyone, and I'm all about supporting and creating personalized plans that align with people's needs and their goals.
That's honestly so cool. I love and value how these traditions and communal values create such a strong foundation for resilience and support, offering lessons that extend far beyond Indigenous communities. Hannah, before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to share with us?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is how I bring the Indigenous values that I just spoke about to my own social work practice. And the one that comes to mind is reciprocity. So when I'm addressing concerns with students, it's really important that I frame the conversation in a way that's collaborative and reciprocal. Rather than me leading the conversation and providing a generic list of techniques that the student can try, it's important that the student has input and is able to share ideas as well. I believe that my conversations with students should be a two-way exchange. This mirrors the ethical principles of Indigenous research, but at a smaller level, of course, as I work one-on-one with students. So when I am working with students, I prioritize active listening and recognizing that they know themselves the best. While I bring professional knowledge as a social worker, I recognize the perspectives, the lived experiences, the resilience, and the cultural strengths that students bring to the table as well. I don't just prescribe solutions to them. I really try to work collaboratively with them and explore options and strategies that meet their needs and goals.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us today and sharing your expertise on this topic. Your insights have really deepened our understanding of the cultural significance and ethical protocols surrounding Indigenous wellness.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really great to be able to share my insight and contribute to your project.
Thank you again, Hannah, for sharing those insights. We also want to thank our listeners for taking the time to engage in our dialogue about Indigenous wellness protocols. Hannah's story and work is incredible, and we have a lot to learn from this holistic approach to wellness. While we acknowledge that there's still so much to learn, we want to encourage our listeners to take the time to further understand this topic and consider how they can include this information into their own lives. We want this project to create dialogue for a safer space for Indigenous practices and protocols here on campus and in the community around us. If you're in crisis, we encourage you to reach out to the Indigenous Crisis Line by dialing 988 for immediate support. For non-emergency assistance, the Writing Symbols Lodge at the University of Calgary is available for help. You can contact them via email, phone, or visit during their drop-in hours at McEwen Hall. We are your hosts, Belen and Sierra. Thank you for listening to the Beyond the Textbook series on CJSW 90.9 FM.